For 3 years, I worked as an assistant to a fine art appraiser and curator. My main responsibility was to create detailed inventories of people's expensive stuff, measurements, photographs, and descriptions. Then, compile the reports once the values had been assigned by the appraiser. I never imagined I would learn that those thick, three-dimensional paintings are called gouache, or that the gold-painted frames are called giltwood, or how wealthy people donate these collections to limit their tax liabilities. It was a job of extremes. One day I'd be digging through a library archive and stumble upon a long-forgotten document signed by Napoleon. The next I'd be working for some billionaire, nervously packing up their artisan dishware for a cross-country move as they looked over my shoulder.
Hey buddy, can you lift with your legs please, not your back? Thanks.
Then there were the regular trips to middle-class homes, where we would take quick inventory of the contents before explaining to an estate executor what should be donated and what few things could actually be sold. When I accepted the position, I assumed I would get some education about rare and valuable things. This turned out to be trivial compared to the education I would receive about people. You could tell who collected art to impress the attendees of their cocktail parties. People who perhaps enjoyed gazing upon the appraisal reports more so than the artwork itself. And you could tell who bought with passion. There was the elderly geology professor who bought little treasures and folk paintings during his decades of global research. There was the eclectic, middle-aged businesswoman who was obsessed with glass sculpture. And then the C-suite executive with an entire floor filled with commissioned portraits of his wife riding a motorcycle, and another floor covered in dozens of large original paintings, all depicting various perspectives on the female derriere. The hopeful investors were their own category. People who hoarded stamps, baseball cards, and Beanie Babies, waiting on a big payday. One rule I learned is that 99% of anything made in a factory is unlikely to appreciate for long, if at all.
These Beanie Babies simply haven't appreciated in the way you've hoped for.
I felt dread as I arrived on site to inventory my first estate. At that point in my fortunate life, I had not lost anyone close to me, and I still considered death to be a faraway land. It wasn't something I dwelled on often, if at all. It was hard not to feel creepy and invasive when sorting through the belongings of the deceased. I shuddered at the thought of some stranger rummaging through my stuff. By the time I had been on the job for a year, I had gotten rather used to it. The dread slowly transformed into a morbid sense of humor. I would eventually start to laugh at the thought of a random person shuffling through my personal items, unobstructed. Enjoy my shitty poetry, I would think to myself. Around this time, I received a phone call. It was from an attorney who was managing the estate of a local artist, who he simply described as a landscape painter. He said she had just passed away at the age of 93, and he wanted us to stop by to take an inventory of what was there and make recommendations on how to dispose of it. Every estate I had worked for were collectors of art. This was the first estate of an artist. I looked up the painter and found out she had created these weird, beautiful watercolor landscapes and abstract collages. She had achieved some regional recognition, but nothing that would be noteworthy to the average person. We showed up at the residence the following day to find the attorney pacing back and forth on the front porch. From the outside, it looked like a nice but unassuming ranch house in a typical Midwestern neighborhood. Given her expressive style of artwork, I assumed the inside would be some funky, bohemian haven. But when the attorney greeted us and opened the front door, I was disappointed to step into what looked like the ordinary dwellings of a nondescript elderly person. Generic decor slapped around an off-white wall, complete with old gray carpet, a beige loveseat sofa, some lamps, a simple wooden coffee table, and an ancient television. It was slightly cozier than a motel room. "Is this everything?" I asked. The attorney finished tapping out a message on his phone, suddenly snapping back to attention. "Oh, dear, sorry, no. The paintings are all downstairs." He waved us into the kitchen and opened a narrow door I figured was a pantry. I felt a rush of cool air as we followed behind him down a rickety wooden staircase and into a pitch-black basement. He cursed under his breath as he fumbled around, looking for the light. I heard the chain yank as a bare overhead bulb illuminated the room. I felt a sense of disorienting awe as I looked around. There were paintings everywhere, layered on the floor, up against the wall, piles and piles of paintings. The basement was completely unfinished, without even a rug. Raw cinder blocks composed each wall. If it weren't for the walkout door on the far end of the room, you could have believed we were in a prison cell. Nestled in the center was an easel, 2 folding tables, a small lamp, and a mid-century rolling office chair. A partially finished piece sat on the easel, with a few paintbrushes hardening themselves to the lower edge. The folding tables contained stacks and stacks of these vibrant, moody illustrations. Some landscape, some abstract. None of them framed. None stored with any care. All collecting dirt and moisture. "Lot of stuff, huh?" said the attorney, with a quarter of a smile. My boss, the appraiser, told me to get started taking count and inventory of each piece. She told the attorney that given the large quantity and modest values of the collection, we would take a formulaic approach to appraisal. Anything undamaged would go to a local gallery to be sold. As I flipped through the paintings, taking measurements and photographs of each, I imagined a 90-year-old woman waking up in the morning, making herself coffee, and posting up in this bare den to paint the day away. My mind attempted to fill in the details of her life and personality. Based on the attorney estate executor, I presumed she had no living children or trusted immediate family. She had clearly been living alone, with the basement as her primary company. I would eventually learn she had studied under other popular mid-century artists and had graduated from a reputable nearby art college. I thought about her being part of a scene and movement at one time, probably eager to share her works with friends, teachers, and galleries. Now, after 70 years of painting, she created alone in a basement. I would eventually learn she was the youngest of 10 siblings. I thought of my own unfamiliarity with death and imagined how much of it she had experienced at her age. I speculated on the weight of these memories she might have felt while creating these works. I was unsure if I should feel pity. I wondered what was in this woman's heart as she sat down here, creating painting and collage day after day. Was she fighting demons, chasing catharsis, or painting blissfully? There were no answers to these questions. As I completed the inventory, I couldn't help but compare the ascetic lifestyle of this art creator with the indulgent, desire-ridden homes of the art collectors. I couldn't help but compare it with my own feelings of need and greed, of playing to the crowd, of wanting more than I already had. It was a cold reminder that the only way to be good, true, and original was to not care if you were any of those things. The German philosopher Schopenhauer once wrote, If admiration were his chief aim, there would be nothing in him to admire. He also said, "The lust of fame is the last that a wise man shakes off." Here, in this dusty basement, these quotes became real to me. You've probably heard the stories about Van Gogh dying broke. Even the laziest of sellouts had more success than him. And unlike Van Gogh, this woman's work will never be heralded as groundbreaking or bring fame to her name. But that's the point. She wasn't trying to break ground or get some little selfish pat on the back. She wasn't trying to buy her way into beauty. She found some within and let it pour out in her own way, on her own terms. She did it for herself.